There are moments in life that don't arrive with noise or warning. Moments that don't announce themselves with clear signs or dramatic change, but instead move quietly beneath the surface, shifting something fundamental that you can feel before you can explain. And this is one of those moments. Because what has recently happened in your life is not just another experience or passing phase. It is a disruption of something that had been in place far longer than you realized. An invisible structure, a pattern, a cycle that once influenced how things unfolded around you. And now, without ceremony, without permission, it has begun to crack. And you can feel it in the way things no longer respond the same, in the way situations feel slightly off, in the way people react with an energy that seems uncertain or unsettled, as if something they relied on is no longer stable. And even if you cannot fully define it yet, you know that something has changed. Not externally in a way that others would immediately recognize, but internally, in a way that has quietly altered your position within everything around you. And this is where the shift truly begins. Because what you are experiencing is not random. It is not coincidence. It is the result of something deeper being interrupted. Something that once repeated itself in subtle forms, shaping outcomes, influencing timing, creating patterns that felt familiar even when they were frustrating or limiting. And now that pattern is no longer holding. And this is why everything feels different. Because when something that has been operating for a long time suddenly loses its grip, there is a period where reality itself seems to adjust, where things feel unpredictable, where reactions do not match expectations, and where you begin to notice that what once felt consistent is no longer behaving the same way. And this can feel confusing at first, because you are standing in between what used to be and what is beginning to form. But this space is not a setback. It is a transition. It is the moment where the old structure no longer defines you, but the new structure has not yet fully revealed itself. And this is why it is so important to understand that what is happening is not something to resist or question, but something to recognize. Because you did not arrive here by accident. Something in you shifted. Something in you moved differently, responded differently, chose differently. And that subtle change was enough to break something that once seemed unbreakable. And now everything that follows will begin to reflect that shift. Not immediately, not all at once, but steadily, as reality reorganizes itself around a version of you that is no longer operating under the same conditions as before. And as you begin to sit with this shift, as you start to observe the subtle differences in how things feel and unfold around you, it becomes increasingly clear that what you are experiencing now did not begin recently. It did not suddenly appear out of nowhere, but has roots that stretch far back into your past, into moments you may not have fully understood at the time, into patterns that repeated themselves in ways that felt strangely familiar even when the circumstances looked different on the surface. And this is where you start to recognize that you were moving inside something much larger than isolated events, something structured, something cyclical. Something that shaped how opportunities appeared, how relationships developed, how progress unfolded. And for a long time, you navigated this without fully seeing it. Because from the inside, patterns rarely announce themselves as patterns. They present as coincidence, as timing, as circumstances that seem disconnected but somehow carry the same emotional tone, the same type of resistance, the same kind of delay. And it is only now, from this new vantage point, that you can begin to look back and see the consistency, to notice how certain situations echoed each other, how certain outcomes repeated with different faces but similar results. And this realization can feel both clarifying and unsettling, because it forces you to acknowledge that there was an underlying structure influencing your path in ways you were not consciously aware of. And yet, at the same time, it also shows you something even more important: that despite not fully seeing it, you were still responding to it, still adapting within it, still developing awareness that would eventually allow you to step beyond it. And this is where your journey takes on a deeper meaning. Because what once felt like random obstacles or unexplained limitations were not meaningless. They were part of a system that was interacting with you, shaping your responses, testing your patterns, revealing where you were still aligned with that cycle and where you were beginning to shift away from it. And this is why certain things felt harder than they should have. Why progress sometimes came with an unusual level of resistance. Why moments of clarity were followed by periods of confusion. Because you were not just moving forward in a straight line. You were moving within a loop that had its own rhythm, its own structure, its own way of maintaining itself. And understanding this changes everything, because it removes the idea that you were somehow doing something wrong or missing something obvious. It shows you that what you were experiencing had a deeper context, that the repetition you felt was not a lack of growth, but a sign that there was a pattern in place that needed to be recognized before it could be broken. And this is where your awareness begins to sharpen. Because once you see a pattern, once you recognize its structure, it no longer has the same level of control over you. It no longer operates invisibly. And this is what begins to weaken it. Not through force, not through struggle, but through recognition. Because awareness disrupts repetition. It introduces choice where there was once automatic response. And this is what you were slowly developing over time. Even when you did not fully realize it, you were noticing things, questioning certain dynamics, feeling that something was off even when you could not articulate it clearly. And these moments were important, because they were the beginning of your separation from the cycle. They were the points where your awareness started to move slightly outside of the pattern, allowing you to observe it rather than simply participate in it. And this shift, although subtle at first, is what eventually led to the moment where everything changed. Because once your awareness reaches a certain level, once you have seen enough, felt enough, experienced enough repetition to recognize the structure beneath it, you can no longer fully engage with it in the same way. Something in you resists returning to the same responses, the same reactions, the same patterns. And this is where the cycle begins to lose its hold. Because it depends on repetition to sustain itself. It depends on predictable responses, on familiar patterns of thought and behavior. And when those begin to change, even slightly, it creates a disruption, a break in the continuity that the cycle relies on. And this is exactly what happened, even if it did not feel dramatic at the time. Even if it was just a small shift in how you responded. A moment where you chose differently. A decision that did not align with your usual pattern. That was enough to begin the process of breaking something that had been in place for a long time. And this is why the change you are experiencing now feels so significant. Because it is not just about what is happening in the present. It is about the accumulation of all those moments where your awareness grew, where your responses shifted, where you moved slightly outside of what was familiar. And this is what ultimately led to the break. Not a single event, but a series of internal changes that reached a point where the old pattern could no longer sustain itself. And now that it has been disrupted, you are in a position where you can see things more clearly, where you can recognize the difference between what was and what is beginning to emerge. And this clarity is what allows you to move forward differently, because you are no longer operating blindly within a cycle. You are aware of it. You understand its structure. And more importantly, you have already begun to step outside of it. And this is what gives you an advantage. Because once a pattern is broken, it cannot easily re-establish itself in the same way, especially when the awareness that disrupted it is still present. And this is why it is so important to continue observing, to continue recognizing the shifts that are happening, not just externally, but within yourself. Because the real change is not just in what is happening around you, it is in how you are engaging with it, how you are interpreting it, how you are choosing to respond. And this is where your growth becomes intentional rather than reactive. Because you are no longer being guided by a pattern you do not see. You are moving with awareness, with understanding, with a level of clarity that allows you to navigate your path in a way that is no longer constrained by what once repeated itself. And this is what sets the foundation for everything that follows. Because now, you are not just experiencing change, you are participating in it consciously. You are aware of the shifts as they happen. And this awareness is what ensures that the break you have initiated continues to expand, continues to reshape your experience, continues to move you further away from what once held you in place and closer to what is now opening up in front of you. And as you continue to trace this shift back to its origin, as you begin to understand that what has changed now is the result of something that has been developing over time, there comes a realization that is both subtle and powerful. Because when you look for the moment where everything broke, where the cycle lost its hold, where the pattern stopped repeating in the same way, you will not find a dramatic event. You will not find a loud turning point or a clearly defined external trigger. Instead, what you will find is something much quieter, something almost easy to overlook. And that is because the break did not happen outside of you. It happened within you. It happened in a moment where your response shifted, where your perspective adjusted, where you chose not to engage in the same way you always had before. And at the time, it may not have felt significant. It may have felt like a small decision, a subtle change in how you thought, how you reacted, how you processed what was happening. But that small internal shift carried a much larger impact than it appeared to on the surface. Because patterns, especially those that have been in place for a long time, do not rely on external conditions as much as they rely on internal consistency. They depend on you responding in predictable ways, thinking in familiar patterns, reacting according to what has been reinforced over time. And the moment that internal consistency changes, even slightly, it creates a disruption that the pattern cannot easily adjust to. And this is exactly what happened, even if you did not fully recognize it at the time. Because when you chose to respond differently, when you stepped outside of your usual way of engaging, you interrupted something that had been running continuously, something that expected you to follow the same path, to repeat the same cycle, to reinforce the same outcome. And when you did not, when you broke that internal alignment with the pattern, it created a break that could not be undone in the same way. And this is why the change feels so deep now, because it was not dependent on external circumstances. It was not something that can simply revert back if conditions shift. It was rooted in you, in your awareness, in your choice. And this makes it fundamentally different, because external changes can be temporary. They can be influenced. They can be reversed. But internal shifts, once they reach a certain level of clarity, are much harder to undo. Because they change how you see things, how you interpret situations, how you respond instinctively. And once that perspective has shifted, you cannot fully return to the previous state, even if you try. because you have already seen beyond it. You have already experienced a different way of engaging. And this is what makes this moment so important, because it marks a point where your internal alignment has changed, where you are no longer synchronized with the pattern that once guided your responses. And this desynchronization is what breaks the cycle. Not forcefully, not dramatically, but definitively. Because without your internal participation, the pattern cannot sustain itself in the same way. And this is why it is so important to understand that the power of this shift lies in its subtlety. Because if it had been loud, if it had been dramatic, it would have been easier to question, easier to doubt, easier to attribute to external factors. But because it was quiet, because it was internal, because it was rooted in your own awareness and choice, it carries a level of authenticity and permanence that cannot be easily dismissed. And this is where your understanding deepens, because you begin to see that real change does not always come from external breakthroughs. It often comes from internal decisions, from moments where you shift your perspective, where you choose differently, where you align yourself in a new way without needing external validation or confirmation. And these moments, although they may seem small, are what create the most significant transformations over time, because they alter the foundation of how you engage with everything else. And this is what you are experiencing now, not the result of a single event, but the unfolding of an internal shift that has reached a point where it is now affecting everything around you. And this is why things feel different, why reactions are changing, why situations are unfolding in unexpected ways. Because the system that once relied on your internal consistency is now encountering something it cannot predict, something it cannot easily adapt to. And this creates a kind of instability, not in a negative sense, but in a way that signals that the old structure is no longer functioning as it once did. And this is where you begin to see the importance of maintaining this new alignment, of continuing to move from this place of awareness, rather than slipping back into old patterns. Because while the cycle has been disrupted, it is your continued alignment with this new perspective that ensures it does not reestablish itself. And this is where your role becomes active rather than passive. Because you are no longer just experiencing change, you are sustaining it. You are reinforcing it through your choices, through your awareness, through your ability to recognize when something aligns with your new direction and when it reflects the old pattern. And this discernment is what allows you to move forward with clarity. Because you are no longer reacting automatically, you are choosing consciously. You are aware of the impact of your responses. And this awareness is what strengthens the break, what ensures that it continues to expand, that it continues to reshape your experience in a way that aligns with where you are now rather than where you were before. And this is what ultimately defines this stage of your journey. Not the moment the pattern broke, but the understanding of how it broke, and the recognition that it was not something done to you. It was something that happened through you, through your awareness, through your choice, through your willingness to respond differently even when it felt unfamiliar. And this is what gives you a level of control that you may not have fully realized before. Because it shows you that the key to changing your experience does not always lie in changing external conditions. It lies in changing how you engage with them, how you interpret them, how you respond to them. And this is what you have done. Whether consciously or not, you have shifted something within yourself that has altered the way everything else interacts with you. And this is why the results you are seeing now are so significant. Because they are not temporary. they are not dependent on external factors. They are the natural outcome of an internal shift that has reached a level where it can no longer be contained within you. It has begun to influence everything around you. And as you continue to move forward with this understanding, you will find that your ability to create change becomes more intentional, more precise, more aligned. Because you now understand where the real point of influence lies. Not outside of you, but within you. In the way you choose to see, to think, to respond. And this understanding is what ensures that the transformation you have initiated continues to unfold, continues to expand, continues to move you further away from what once limited you and deeper into a space where your awareness and your actions are fully aligned. And as this internal shift continues to ripple outward, as the break you initiated within yourself begins to extend beyond your thoughts and into the environment around you, you start to notice something that feels almost difficult to explain at first, because it is not tied to a single event or a clearly defined change, but rather to a series of subtle irregularities, small disruptions in how things usually behave, moments where reactions do not align with expectations, where timing feels slightly off, where interactions carry an unusual tension or unpredictability. And this is where you begin to recognize that what has changed within you is now affecting the system around you. Because when a pattern loses its ability to predict and guide your responses, it does not simply disappear without consequence. It creates a kind of instability, a disruption in the flow that once felt consistent. And this disruption can manifest in ways that seem scattered at first, like people reacting more strongly than usual to minor situations, or certain dynamics becoming strained without a clear cause, or even opportunities appearing in unexpected ways that do not follow the previous pattern you were used to. And all of this can feel confusing if you are looking for a single explanation. But when you step back and observe it as part of a larger shift, it begins to make sense. Because what you are witnessing is the system attempting to adjust to a version of you that it no longer fully recognizes. And this is why things feel like they are glitching. Not in a literal sense, but in the way that patterns that once ran smoothly are now encountering resistance, unpredictability, or breakdown. Because they are no longer aligned with your internal state. And this is where your awareness becomes even more important. Because without it, these changes can feel chaotic or unsettling. But with it, you can begin to see them for what they are, signs that the old structure is no longer functioning as it once did. Signs that the break you initiated is having a real and tangible effect. And this is where your role shifts again, from simply recognizing the change to understanding how to navigate within it. Because when systems lose stability, there is often a period of fluctuation, a time where things may not feel fully settled, where new patterns have not yet formed and old ones are no longer holding. And this in-between space requires a different kind of awareness, one that is not looking for immediate clarity, but is instead focused on observation, on understanding how things are unfolding without rushing to define them too quickly. And this is where your ability to remain grounded becomes essential. Because while others may react to these changes with confusion or intensity, you have the opportunity to remain steady, to observe without being pulled into every reaction, to recognize that what is happening is part of a larger adjustment rather than a series of disconnected events. And this perspective is what allows you to move through this phase with clarity rather than uncertainty. Because you are not expecting everything to make immediate sense. You are allowing the process to unfold while maintaining your awareness of the shift that has already taken place. And this is what keeps you aligned, What prevents you from being drawn back into old patterns during this period of instability? Because even though the environment may feel unpredictable, your internal alignment remains consistent. And this consistency is what anchors you, what allows you to navigate the changes without losing your direction. And this is where you begin to notice something even more interesting, that the reactions you are seeing from others are not random. They are responses to the shift in your energy, to the fact that you are no longer engaging in the same way, no longer reinforcing the same dynamics. And this can create a sense of imbalance for those who are still operating within the old pattern, because they are encountering something that does not respond as expected, something that does not follow the same rules they are used to. And this can lead to a range of reactions, from curiosity to discomfort, to even subtle attempts to pull you back into familiar dynamics. And this is where your awareness becomes your greatest tool, because it allows you to recognize these reactions without being influenced by them, to see them as part of the adjustment process rather than as something you need to fix or respond to immediately. And this is what strengthens your position, because it ensures that you remain aligned with your new state rather than being drawn back into the old one. And as you continue to observe these changes, you will begin to see patterns within the disruption itself. You will notice that certain dynamics no longer hold, that certain interactions no longer have the same effect, that certain opportunities or challenges appear in ways that are different from before. And this is where the new structure begins to emerge, not fully formed, not immediately clear, but gradually taking shape as the old one fades. And this is what requires patience, because while the break has already happened, the formation of something new takes time. It requires observation, adjustment, continued alignment with your internal shift. And this is where your role becomes one of conscious participation, because you are not just waiting for things to settle, you are actively shaping how they do. Through your awareness, through your choices, through your ability to remain aligned even when things feel uncertain. And this is what ultimately determines how this transition unfolds. Because the more you maintain your alignment, the more stable the new structure becomes, the more clearly it begins to define itself. And this is where you start to see the benefits of the break, not just in the disruption of the old pattern, but in the opportunities that arise as a result of it, in the ways that things begin to move more freely, more naturally, more in alignment with your current state. And this is what confirms that the shift is real, that it is not just a temporary fluctuation, but a fundamental change in how things are unfolding around you. And as this becomes more evident, your confidence in the process deepens, not because everything is fully clear, but because you can see the direction it is moving in. You can recognize that despite the temporary instability, there is a larger alignment taking place. And this is what allows you to continue moving forward with trust, with awareness, with the understanding that what you are experiencing is not a breakdown, but a recalibration. Not a loss of structure, but the beginning of a new one that is more aligned with who you are now. And as you continue to navigate this space, you will find that the sense of unpredictability begins to lessen, that the new patterns begin to stabilize, that the environment begins to reflect your internal shift more consistently. And this is where everything starts to feel more coherent again. Not in the same way as before, but in a way that is more aligned, more responsive, more reflective of the changes you have made within yourself. And this is what ultimately confirms that you have moved beyond the old cycle, that the break you initiated has taken hold, and that what lies ahead is no longer governed by the same patterns that once defined your path, but by a new structure that is still forming, still evolving, but already moving in a direction that reflects the shift you have created. And as this recalibration continues to unfold around you, as the instability of the old structure gives way to something new that is still forming. You begin to notice a shift that is no longer just environmental. It becomes relational. It becomes visible in the way people interact with you, in the way their energy changes in your presence, in the way conversations carry a different tone, even when the words themselves remain the same. And this is where it becomes clear that what has shifted within you is now being perceived externally, even by those who cannot consciously explain what they are sensing. Because when you step outside of a pattern that once defined how others experienced you, you no longer fit into the role they unconsciously assigned to you. And this creates a kind of tension, not necessarily conflict, but a subtle unease that arises when familiarity is replaced by unpredictability. And this is why you begin to see reactions that feel inconsistent. Moments where someone who once interacted with you in a certain way now hesitates, now adjusts, now responds with a level of caution or curiosity that was not there before. And at first, this can feel confusing, because nothing about your external behavior may seem dramatically different. You may not feel like you have changed in a way that should cause such noticeable reactions. And yet, something is clearly being perceived. Something is being registered beneath the surface. And this is where you begin to understand that the shift you made internally is not invisible. It carries an energy, a presence, a difference in how you engage, how you respond, how you hold yourself within interactions. And this difference is what others are reacting to, even if they cannot articulate it, even if they are not consciously aware of why it feels different. And this is what creates that sense of unease. Because people are highly attuned to patterns, to consistency, to predictability. And when those elements change, even subtly, it disrupts their ability to navigate interactions in the way they are used to. And this is where your presence begins to take on a new quality. One that is less about what you say or do, and more about how you exist within a space. Because you are no longer reinforcing the same dynamics. You are no longer responding in ways that align with previous expectations. And this creates a kind of gap. A space where others must adjust their perception of you, must reassess how they interact with you. And this process can manifest in different ways depending on the individual. Because some may respond with curiosity, trying to understand what has changed, trying to engage with this new version of you in a way that makes sense to them, while others may respond with discomfort, because the lack of predictability challenges their sense of control or familiarity. And this is where you begin to see the deeper impact of the shift you have made. Not just in your own experience, but in how it influences the dynamics around you. Because when you change your internal alignment, it naturally alters the roles you play in different interactions. And this can lead to a reconfiguration of relationships, of communication patterns, of the way people approach you and respond to you. And this reconfiguration is not something you need to force or control. It is a natural consequence of the shift you have already made. And this is where your awareness becomes essential once again, because it allows you to observe these changes without becoming entangled in them. To recognize that the reactions you are seeing are not something you need to fix or manage, but something that reflects the adjustment process taking place around you. And this perspective is what keeps you grounded, what prevents you from reverting back to old patterns in an attempt to restore familiarity or ease. Because it can be tempting, when faced with these changes, to fall back into what is known, to respond in ways that feel more comfortable for others, to re-establish the dynamics that once felt stable. But this is where your growth is tested, because maintaining your new alignment requires you to remain consistent even when the environment around you is still adjusting. It requires you to trust that the discomfort or uncertainty others may feel is not a sign that something is wrong, but a sign that something is different. And this difference is what allows new dynamics to form, new patterns to emerge, new ways of interacting to develop that are more aligned with who you are now rather than who you were before. And this is where your presence becomes a kind of anchor within the shifting environment. Because while others may be adjusting, reacting, trying to understand what has changed, you remain steady. You remain aligned. You remain consistent in your awareness. And this consistency is what gradually stabilizes the new dynamic. Because over time, as people continue to interact with you in this new way, as they adjust to your different responses, your different energy, your different presence, the initial unease begins to fade, and a new sense of familiarity begins to form. One that is based not on the old pattern, but on the new alignment you are holding. And this is where the transformation becomes fully integrated. Because it is no longer just something you feel internally or observe externally. It becomes the new baseline, the new way in which interactions unfold, the new structure that replaces what once existed. And this is what ultimately confirms the depth of the shift you have made. Because it is not temporary. It is not something that can be easily reversed. It is something that has redefined how you exist within your environment, how you are perceived, how you are engaged with. And as you continue to move forward with this awareness, you will find that your relationships, your interactions, your connections begin to align more naturally with your current state. Because those who are able to adjust will meet you where you are, while those who cannot may gradually fall out of alignment, not through conflict, but through a natural separation that occurs when patterns no longer match. And this process, although it may feel uncertain at times, is part of the realignment. Part of the way in which your environment reorganizes itself to reflect the shift you have made within yourself. And this is where your confidence deepens even further, because you begin to see that your internal alignment has a direct impact on your external experience. That the way you hold yourself, the way you respond, the way you engage with the world shapes the dynamics around you in ways that go beyond surface-level interaction. And this understanding is what empowers you to continue moving forward with clarity, with intention, with the recognition that the changes you have made are not only valid, but transformative. Not only for you, but for the way everything around you begins to respond and evolve in alignment with who you are becoming. And as these relational shifts begin to stabilize, as people gradually adjust to the new way you show up and interact, there comes another realization that rises quietly, but carries profound weight. Because beyond how others are reacting, beyond how situations are reorganizing themselves, there is a deeper truth that becomes impossible to ignore. And that truth is this: you are no longer operating by the same internal script that once guided your behavior. Because if you look closely, if you observe your own responses in moments that would have once triggered familiar reactions, you will notice something unmistakable. You do not respond the same way anymore. You do not engage with the same emotional patterns. You do not fall into the same cycles of thought or reaction. And this is not something you are forcing. It is something that has naturally shifted within you as a result of everything you have seen, everything you have recognized, everything you have become aware of. And this is where it becomes clear that the break you initiated was not just about disrupting an external pattern. It was about stepping completely outside of the script that once defined how you moved through those patterns. Because patterns are not sustained by external events alone. They are sustained by internal consistency, by predictable responses, by habitual ways of thinking and reacting that reinforce the same outcomes over time. And when those responses change, when that internal script is no longer followed, the pattern loses its foundation. It no longer has the structure it needs to repeat itself. And this is exactly what has happened, even if it unfolded gradually, even if it did not feel like a single decisive moment. You have stepped outside of the script. You have moved beyond the automatic responses that once kept you within the cycle. And this is what makes your current position so different. Because you are no longer predictable in the way you once were. Not in a chaotic sense, but in a liberated sense. Because your responses are no longer dictated by past conditioning. They are guided by present awareness. And this distinction is what changes everything. Because when you are no longer reacting based on what has been programmed or repeated, you create space for new outcomes, new dynamics, new possibilities that were not accessible within the old script. And this is where your awareness becomes fully active, because you are not just observing patterns anymore. You are actively choosing how to engage with them. You are deciding in real time whether something aligns with your current state or reflects an old pattern that no longer serves you. And this level of conscious engagement is what ensures that the shift you have made continues to hold. Because you are no longer operating on autopilot. You are present. You are aware. You are intentional in your responses. And this is what makes it impossible for the old script to reassert itself in the same way. Because it depends on unconscious participation. It relies on you falling back into familiar reactions without questioning them. And now that you are aware of those patterns, now that you have experienced what it feels like to step outside of them, that unconscious participation is no longer available. And this is where your growth becomes self-sustaining. Because the more you operate from this place of awareness, the more natural it becomes. The less effort it requires. The more it integrates into your way of being. And this is where you begin to notice that your decisions are changing. Not in a forced or dramatic way, but in a subtle and consistent way that reflects your new alignment. Because you are no longer making choices based on fear, habit, or expectation. You are making them based on clarity, on understanding, on a sense of alignment with where you are now rather than where you have been. And this is what allows your path to unfold differently, because each choice you make reinforces the break you have already initiated. Each moment where you respond from awareness rather than habit strengthens the new structure that is forming. And this is where you begin to see the true impact of stepping outside the script. Because it is not just about avoiding old patterns, it is about creating new ones. About establishing a way of moving through the world that is not constrained by what once repeated itself, but is instead shaped by your current understanding, your current awareness, your current alignment. And this is where your confidence begins to deepen in a way that is stable rather than reactive. Because it is not based on external validation or temporary outcomes. It is based on your ability to navigate situations with clarity, to respond in ways that feel aligned, to maintain your awareness even when circumstances shift. And this is what gives you a sense of control that is not about forcing outcomes, but about understanding your role within them. About recognizing that while you may not control everything that happens around you, you do control how you engage with it, how you interpret it, how you respond to it. And this control is what allows you to move forward with a level of certainty that is grounded in your own awareness, rather than dependent on external conditions. And as you continue to operate from this place, you will find that the environment around you continues to adjust, continues to reflect the changes you have made. Because when you step outside of a script that once defined your interactions, it creates space for new dynamics to form, for new opportunities to arise, for new patterns to develop that are more aligned with who you are now. And this is where the concept of luck begins to take on a different meaning. Because what may appear as fortunate timing or unexpected opportunities is often the result of alignment, of being in a position where you are no longer blocking or repeating what once limited you. And this is what allows things to flow more naturally, more efficiently, more in sync with your current state. And this flow is not something that happens by chance. It is something that emerges when resistance is removed, when patterns that once created friction are no longer in place. And this is what you have achieved, not by forcing change, but by becoming aware of what needed to change and allowing that awareness to guide your responses, your decisions, your engagement with the world. And this is what ultimately defines this stage of your journey. Not the breaking of the pattern itself, but the way you continue to move beyond it. The way you sustain the shift through your awareness, through your choices, through your ability to remain aligned, even as everything around you continues to evolve. And this is what ensures that what you have stepped into is not temporary, but transformative. Not a brief moment of change, but a lasting shift in how you navigate your path, how you engage with your reality, how you create your experience moving forward. And as this continues to unfold, you will find that the sense of effort that once accompanied your progress begins to lessen, that the resistance that once slowed you down begins to fade, that the clarity you now carry allows you to move with greater ease, greater precision, greater alignment. And this is what confirms that you are no longer operating within the same system. You are moving in a new way, guided by awareness rather than repetition, by alignment rather than habit. And this is what makes everything that follows fundamentally different from what came before. And as you continue to move within this new alignment, as your awareness stabilizes, and your responses become naturally guided by clarity rather than habit, there comes a phase where everything begins to feel noticeably different in a way that is both subtle and undeniable. Because what once required effort now begins to unfold with a sense of ease. What once felt delayed now begins to move with unexpected timing. What once seemed complicated now starts to resolve itself with a kind of quiet efficiency. And this is where many would describe what is happening as luck, as if something external has suddenly decided to favor you, as if circumstances have shifted randomly in your favor. But as you observe more closely, as you reflect on everything that has led you to this point, you begin to understand that what you are experiencing is not random at all. It is the direct result of the release you have created by stepping outside of the patterns that once restricted you. Because when resistance is removed, when the internal script that once reinforced limitation is no longer active, the flow of events naturally changes. Not because something new has been added, but because something that once interfered is no longer present. And this is what makes this phase so important to understand. Because if you interpret it as luck, you may not fully recognize your role in it. You may see it as something that came from outside of you, rather than something that emerged from the shift within you. And this misunderstanding can lead to a sense of uncertainty, a feeling that what has improved could just as easily change again without your control. But when you recognize that what you are experiencing is alignment rather than luck, everything becomes more stable. Because alignment is not something that happens randomly. It is something that is created through your awareness, through your choices, through your ability to remain consistent in the way you engage with your environment. And this is where your understanding deepens. Because you begin to see that the ease you are experiencing now is not the absence of effort, but the absence of unnecessary resistance. It is not that things have suddenly become effortless, but that you are no longer working against patterns that once slowed you down. And this distinction is what allows you to maintain this flow, Because you are not relying on chance. You are continuing to move in a way that supports the alignment you have already established. And this is where your awareness becomes even more refined. Because you begin to notice how quickly things respond when you are aligned. How smoothly interactions unfold when you are not carrying old expectations or reactions into them. How opportunities appear when you are not unconsciously blocking them through habitual patterns. And this responsiveness is what confirms that the system you are now operating within is different. Because it is no longer governed by the same constraints. It is more fluid, more adaptable, more reflective of your current state. And this is what gives you a new level of confidence. Not because everything is guaranteed to be easy, but because you understand the mechanism behind the ease. You understand that it comes from alignment, from awareness, from the absence of patterns that once created friction. And this understanding is what allows you to sustain it. Because you are not passively experiencing it. You are actively maintaining it through your choices, through your awareness, through your ability to recognize when something aligns with your current state and when it reflects an old pattern that no longer belongs in your experience. And this is where your discernment becomes sharper. Because you are now able to distinguish between what supports your alignment and what disrupts it. And this ability is what ensures that the flow you are experiencing continues. Because you are no longer engaging with everything indiscriminately. You are selective. You are intentional. You are aware of the impact of your choices on the overall direction of your path. And this is what transforms your relationship with what many would call luck. Because you no longer see it as something unpredictable or outside of your control. You see it as a reflection of your alignment, as a natural outcome of the way you are now moving through the world. And this perspective is what removes the uncertainty, what replaces it with a sense of stability. Because you understand that as long as you maintain your awareness, as long as you continue to operate from this place of alignment, the flow will remain. It may shift, it may evolve, it may present itself in different forms, but it will not disappear randomly. Because it is not random to begin with. It is rooted in you, in your internal state, in the way you engage with everything around you. And this is where your confidence becomes deeply grounded, because it is no longer dependent on outcomes. It is based on understanding, on recognizing the connection between your internal alignment and your external experience. And this is what allows you to move forward without hesitation. Because you are not waiting to see if things will work out. You are creating the conditions that allow them to. And this creation is not about controlling every detail. It is about maintaining the alignment that supports the outcomes you are moving toward. And this is where your path begins to feel more coherent, more connected, more reflective of who you are now. Because you are no longer navigating through resistance. You are moving with a sense of flow that is supported by your awareness, by your choices, by your ability to remain aligned even as circumstances continue to change. And this is what ultimately defines this phase. Not the appearance of ease, but the understanding of where that ease comes from, and the recognition that it is something you can sustain, not by holding on to it tightly, but by continuing to move in the way that created it in the first place. With awareness, with intention, with a clear understanding of the patterns you have stepped beyond and the alignment you are now operating within. And as you continue to embody this, you will find that what once felt uncertain becomes more predictable. Not in a rigid or limiting way, but in a way that reflects the consistency of your alignment. Because when you are aligned, the system responds accordingly. It reflects that alignment back to you through timing, through opportunities, through the way things unfold. And this reflection is what reinforces your understanding, what strengthens your trust in the process, what allows you to move forward with a level of clarity that is not dependent on external validation, but is grounded in your own experience, your own awareness, your own recognition of how things now work when you are no longer bound by the patterns that once defined your path. And as this alignment continues to stabilize, as the flow you are experiencing becomes less of a surprise and more of a natural state, there comes a realization that reaches even deeper than everything you have understood so far. Because up until this point, you may have seen what happened as breaking free from something, as stepping out of a cycle, as releasing yourself from a pattern that once held you in place. But as you look more closely, as you reflect on how everything has unfolded, you begin to see that what occurred was not just an escape. It was a disruption at a structural level. Something that did not simply remove you from the pattern, but altered the pattern itself in a way that makes it far more difficult to reattach. And this is where your understanding expands beyond your personal experience, into the recognition that when a pattern is broken at the level of awareness, when it is not just avoided but fully seen, fully understood, and consciously stepped beyond, it loses more than its influence over you. It loses its stability, its ability to function in the same way it once did. And this is why what you have done carries such a lasting impact. Because you did not just move around the pattern, you moved through it. You recognized it for what it was. You changed your relationship to it. And in doing so, you removed the foundation that allowed it to operate seamlessly in your life. And this is what makes your current position fundamentally different from simply avoiding a situation or making a temporary change. Because avoidance can still leave the pattern intact. It can still allow it to reappear under different circumstances. But awareness that leads to a complete shift in response changes the structure itself. It removes the automatic pathways that once allowed the pattern to repeat. And this is why you may notice that even when similar situations arise, they do not unfold in the same way. They do not carry the same energy. They do not lead to the same outcomes. Because the mechanism that once guided them has been altered. And this is where your role becomes even more significant. Because you are not just someone who has experienced change. You are someone who has influenced the structure of how that change occurs. And this influence is not something external or forceful. It is rooted in your awareness, in your ability to see patterns clearly and choose differently. And this is what gives you a level of agency that goes beyond surface-level control. Because you are no longer trying to manage outcomes directly. You are shaping the conditions that lead to those outcomes through your alignment, through your understanding, through your conscious engagement with the patterns that present themselves. And this is where your journey takes on a new dimension. Because you begin to see that the work you have done within yourself has effects that extend outward, that influence the dynamics around you, that create shifts not just in your own experience, but in the way interactions, opportunities, and situations unfold in your environment. And this realization can feel both empowering and humbling, because it shows you the depth of your impact while also reminding you of the responsibility that comes with it. The responsibility to remain aware, to continue observing, to avoid falling back into unconscious patterns that could begin to rebuild what you have already broken. And this is where your awareness must remain active, not in a way that creates tension or overthinking, but in a way that keeps you connected to your alignment, that allows you to recognize when something reflects your current state and when it echoes something from the past that no longer belongs. And this recognition is what ensures that the disruption you have created continues to hold, continues to expand, continues to influence the structure of your experience in a way that supports your growth rather than limiting it. And as you continue to move forward with this understanding, you will begin to notice that the sense of effort that once accompanied change begins to fade even further. Because you are no longer working against something, you are working with your awareness. You are allowing it to guide you naturally. And this is what creates a sense of flow that is not forced, not manufactured, but organic, arising from the alignment you have established. And this flow is what allows you to move through situations with a level of ease that is grounded in understanding. Because you are not reacting blindly, you are responding with clarity, with intention, with a recognition of how your actions influence the patterns around you. And this is what ultimately defines this stage of your journey. Not just the breaking of the pattern, but the transformation of how patterns operate in your life. The realization that you are not subject to them in the way you once were, but are instead capable of influencing them through your awareness, through your choices, through your alignment. And this is what gives you a sense of stability that is not dependent on external conditions, because it is rooted in something deeper, something that remains consistent regardless of what is happening around you. And as this understanding continues to deepen, you will find that your trust in yourself grows stronger. Not because everything is predictable, but because you know that you can navigate whatever arises with clarity, with awareness, with the ability to recognize patterns and respond in a way that aligns with your current state, rather than reverting to old habits. And this is what ultimately ensures that the shift you have experienced is not temporary, but lasting. Not a momentary breakthrough, but a fundamental change in how you engage with your reality. And as you continue to embody this, you will see that the impact of what you have done extends beyond what you can immediately observe. That the disruption you have created continues to influence the unfolding of your path in ways that may not always be visible in the moment, but will become clear over time. And this is what allows you to move forward with confidence, not in the sense of knowing exactly what will happen next, but in the sense of trusting that whatever does happen will align with the structure you have helped reshape, with the awareness you have developed, with the understanding that you are no longer operating within the same limitations that once defined your experience. And this is what ultimately sets you apart, not as someone who has simply changed, but as someone who has transformed the way change itself operates within your life. And as everything now begins to settle into a new sense of order, as the disruption that once felt uncertain reveals itself as the beginning of something far more aligned, you arrive at a point of understanding that brings everything together with a quiet but undeniable clarity. Because what once felt like chaos, like instability, like something breaking apart, is now seen for what it truly was: a necessary release, a dismantling of a structure that could no longer hold the version of you that you have become. And this is where the meaning of everything you have experienced becomes clear, not as a series of disconnected events, but as a continuous process that has led you to this exact moment, where you are no longer operating within the same limits, no longer repeating the same cycles, no longer responding from the same patterns. And this realization carries a kind of calm confidence, because it is not based on hope or expectation. It is based on evidence, on everything you have already seen shift, on everything you have already experienced changing in ways that could not be reversed. And this is what allows you to move forward differently, not with hesitation, not with the need to constantly analyze or question, but with a grounded trust in the alignment you have established. Because you now understand that what you have stepped into is not temporary. It is not something that will fade without reason. It is the result of a deeper change that has already taken place within you. And as long as you remain connected to that awareness, as long as you continue to move from that place of clarity, rather than falling back into unconscious patterns, what you have created will continue to hold, will continue to expand, will continue to shape your experience in ways that reflect the shift you have made. And this is where the idea of a new phase becomes more than just a concept. It becomes something you can feel in the way things unfold, in the way timing aligns, in the way opportunities appear without the same resistance. And this is not because the world has suddenly changed around you, but because you are no longer engaging with it in the same way. You are no longer reinforcing what once limited you. And this is what allows everything to move differently, to respond differently, to open in ways that were not accessible before. And as you continue forward, this understanding becomes your foundation. Not something you need to remind yourself of constantly, but something that naturally guides you, that informs your decisions, that keeps you aligned even as new situations arise. And this is what ultimately defines your path from this point on. Not the patterns you have left behind, but the awareness you now carry, the clarity you have developed, and the recognition that what once held you is no longer part of the system you are operating within. And that is what gives you the freedom, the direction, and the quiet certainty to continue moving forward without needing to look back.